I heard, and then I also heard that everybody was screaming and shouting on the field. The kids came out, and how do you guys handle messes like that? Hey, everybody, this is James, and welcome to UmpireCoaching.com. And this is a podcast that's intended specifically for umpires and coaches of Little League baseball and softball. The topic is interference and obstruction. And so we're just going to go around the room and give a brief introduction. Again, I'm James. I've been umpiring and coaching as a volunteer since the turn of the century. We've been putting this together as a package to really help people who are coming in that can offer some insight on some interesting rules and training opportunities with the game of baseball and softball. So, Roger, if you could introduce yourself real quick.
I'm Roger. I have been a umpire for about 5 years now. I coach at various levels, and I'm a parent of two teenagers who are in high school and in middle school, going through the baseball journey themselves.
Excellent. Nick?
Well, this coming season is my 37th season. I also umpire high school and I used to what is now today USA softball. I've been selected to work two Little League softball division World Series and been selected for a couple of regional tournaments, taught many local rules clinics and umpire clinics, even a little bit teaching at Western Region.
And Brent?
Yeah, I've been umpiring way too long, more than Nick, and definitely before the turn of the century. I've had the good fortune to umpire in 3 regionals and 1 junior girls softball World Series in Kirkland, Washington.
Awesome. All right, so the topic is the obstruction and the interference. Everyone here listening is going to get the benefit of 2 individuals who I would consider professor level when it comes to umpiring, and this is their forte. We're just going to kind of ease into this and talk a little bit about why interference and obstruction is important and discuss a little bit about the details. So, and starting at the top of the page, Brent, if you've got some things to start with, we'll just go from there.
Basic thing to think about are the concepts to remember when you're talking about both obstruction and interference and what's happening during the game. On a batted ball, the defensive players have 100% of the right of way to field the batted ball. Once it's fielded or it's settled in the ground and somebody's going to go pick it up, then the runner has 100% of the right of way to the base path that they establish as they're running around the bases until there's somebody in front of them with a ball waiting to make a play on them. Okay. So that's what you've got to think about when you're thinking. And basically, by definition, if we want to start off with obstruction is the act of a fielder who, while not in possession of the ball, impedes progress of any runner. A fake tag is considered obstruction.
Going back to Brent's comment about the defense having 100% of the right of way on a batted ball, only one fielder receives that protection. The fielder that the umpire judges has the play, or however you want to state that, is the only one that gets protection. So if you've got, say, 2 fielders converging on a batted ball, only one of those fielders is going to be protected.
So, as far as definition of terms go, let's break this down, because what's confusing, and this was brought up and I hadn't thought of it before, they use interference when they're talking about about the defense in some cases, and they use the word, don't they? I don't think they use the word obstruction when they're talking about the offense. But isn't it correct that the word interference is used in the book in reference to the defense?
The basic rule is that the offense interferes and the defense obstructs. Many, if not virtually all, managers and coaches really don't understand those terms, and they're coming out and asking you for an interference call on what was an obstruction play or possible obstruction play.
Yeah, the one that you're talking about, James, there's only one that should be called obstruction that Little League calls interference. That's why people get confused. In other organizations, it's called catcher's obstruction, not catcher's interference.
Is that different in softball? are those concepts
For Little League, the rule books are exactly the same. But what I'm saying is in other organizations, the fielder is obstructing. So in this case, the batter swings the bat, catcher has their glove out there. Did they obstruct? Did they impede or, the progress of that batter? Unfortunately, Little League and Major League Baseball calls it catcher's interference.
Roger, do you want to read the rule that you typed in there? Roger typed. You guys came in this morning and dressed this up for us, and we appreciate it. But Roger typed all that stuff in himself, which I thought was so. Thank you, Roger. But yeah, if you would read that first line there about.
Nick already read that though.
So
I mean, I think what we can do though, if you know what I'll read, because I think that we're going to talk about interference or A and B, right? And so I can read that part. So let me.
Nick wrote some stuff in here, so let's have him go ahead and read that. And
sure.
Okay. In general, kind of another way to restate the definition of obstruction is if a runner has to slow down or stop or change direction or veer out of the path that they're taking because of a fielder's action other than fielding a batted ball, we have obstruction.
Okay.
There does not have to be contact between a fielder and a runner in order to call obstruction. A couple examples of obstruction that may not be so obvious that they are obstruction. You have a fielder is going to make a play on a batted ball, and they boot the initial play, and the ball deflects off to the side. The fielder gets in the runner's way as they chase after the ball. There's no interference on this play because the fielder booted the ball. The runner had the expectation that the fielder was going to catch the ball, and they didn't. So that's the fielder's fault. Okay. The fielder can be protected on that initial play if they can still retrieve the ball within a step and a reach. They can still be considered in the act of fielding the ball and would be protected.
So my question on that, just to be clear, let's say first base, ball's hit to first base. He goes for it, somehow kicks it with his foot. Now, when he goes to get that ball after he kicked it, are you saying he's no longer protected?
That's correct.
That's a really good one. I know lots of scenarios where that would apply, so especially at the lower levels. So then your next part here, as far as the fielder yielding 100% of the bag when they're coming in to get to the base, you got the runner coming from third. You have a catcher who's camping out on the plate without a baseball, waiting for the throw for the outfield. This happens every day, all day. The kid's standing there. I'm watching and I'm thinking, okay, as a plate umpire, I'm thinking, okay, he's got to yield the bag. Well, I don't have a runner that's at the bag yet. He's coming down. And so I'm standing there watching. As soon as I have a runner that is hitting his slide, now the catcher has the ball and there's a tag. What are you looking for as umpires to judge whether you're just going to call whatever the result of the throw was or obstruction? What are you watching for?
One thing about obstruction, it's not an automatic call. In your scenario where we have a catcher who is standing on the plate waiting for a throw to come in and a runner coming in from third base trying to score, we don't have obstruction until we see that runner react to the catcher's presence. Okay. We see the runner slow down, alter their path, something like that. If the runner keeps coming, and if I understood what you were describing, the runner keeps coming without slowing down or anything, and the throw does reach the catcher, and now just as the runner is starting their slide, the catcher has possession of the ball. Now the runner, if they're just starting their slide, it means they're a few feet away from the plate, and the catcher turns and makes a tag. Did you see the runner slow down or alter their path? If the answer is no, then we don't have obstruction. But you'll get an argument that, well, he was standing on the plate and the runner couldn't get there. Well, I didn't see the runner show me that he couldn't get there.
The main example of that is any motion, however slight, to alter their course. Now you've got obstruction. We do not enforce it the way MLB does, which is the catcher sets up there before they've received the ball. That's obstruction all day long. They score the run. They must be positioned in front of home plate.
does that have anything to
Yeah.
do in that scenario? Does that have anything to do with how far away the runner is from the bag, the distance from the bag? I mean, if he's 10 feet off of third base and the catcher's standing there and he turns around and goes back, that's not obstruction, is it? You still have to have a runner be impeded from the bag, correct?
Well, it could be obstruction. That's where umpire judgment comes in. If he's 30 feet away from home plate, I'm probably not going to call that obstruction. But if he's 10 feet away from home plate, well, yeah, now he's in the range where he's reacting to the presence of the defensive player.
It used to say in the book that the player was not supposed to initially set up in the base path. They might have removed that finally.
So I have a question, actually, like a follow up to this.
Yeah.
So we're saying that as soon as the runner makes what the umpire determines is an action they wouldn't have otherwise taken because of the position of the defensive player, that's when we have obstruction. We have kids that, at the lower levels that do all sorts of things all sort of the time, and to understand their intent is tricky at best. So how would you make that like assessment for when a runner was just like, oh, there's a kid there and I'm going to turn around. It looks like they're about to catch the ball and I'm going to turn around, not that there's a blocking or whatever. How do you make that assessment?
That one, I haven't had them turn around so much. Is what I have is they've established their path towards home plate. Now they see the player is set up in the line and they adjust slightly to their right to try to go around them. As soon as they make that adjustment, because the player's standing there, I now have obstruction because they've altered their base path because there's a person in front of them without the ball.
Yeah, what Brent just said there is important. Let's not lose sight of that fact that the defensive player does not have possession of the ball when we're calling obstruction. If they have possession of the ball, play on. Whatever happens, happens.
I've seen a lot of times, especially, and it really happens more in that 12-year-old range, where they're watching whether it's the catcher or a third baseman or a second baseman, whatever. They're watching that player, and that player looks like they're about to catch the ball. They're making that body motion where they're starting to look like they're going to catch a ball, and they turn around because of that, versus the scenario where they're turning around because the base is blocked. How would you make that assessment between turning around because it looks like I'm going to get out because I misjudged where the ball is because I don't know because it's behind me, that I'm blocked, so I'm turning around, or I'm not making the right play because of obstruction? Does that make sense, or am I?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. However, I have, over the many decades, the amount of times a player has stopped and turned around has been maybe a handful. It doesn't happen. They come home or they go to second. They keep going. They just don't go back.
So then, since we're talking about home plate, let's just try to cover as many scenarios of obstruction and interference at home plate. The one that I know personally is my son was at a state baseball tournament. He's the batter. I think we had 2 outs. There's a pass ball with a runner at third. The runner at third's coming home, and he's the bat. My son's the batter. I taught him on the pass ball scenario, you need to seek the opposite fence and start walking towards first base. Well, the field we're at has a wooden backboard. That ball likes to ping pong, so it hit on the left side and then ricocheted over, got stuck between my son's feet. The catcher went for it. I think it may have hit him, but I don't believe the catcher had trouble getting the ball. But by that time, the runner had scored, and they called my son out on interference. Yeah, that was a hard pill to swallow for him and me. I recognize, and I've coached my kids this way, there are times when the batter is screwed.
Well, in that scenario, what the umpire needs to judge is, was your son, the batter, paying attention to the ball? Or was he just sort of absentmindedly just walking that direction? Indifference equals intent. If you're not paying attention, then that was intentional. and now the interference rule is going to apply. But if you're observing the ball, trying to move away from it, the ball takes a crazy bounce, or now I'm not going to penalize you because you were trying to get out of the way.
Right.
Circumstances beyond your control cause the ball to end up at your feet.
So I also, just to add to that, and the reason I added 2 outs, because isn't there a difference when there's less than 2 outs? Isn't in that scenario the runner out?
In Little League,
Yeah.
if you're talking about batter's interference, batter interfering with a play at home plate, if there is less than 2 outs, the runner is out. When there's 2 outs, the batter's always out.
That's fair. That makes sense. It was definitely a learning moment. We all have them. At his 12-year-old or his 11-year-old self learned to pay attention. Another scenario, since we're discussing home plate, we had a scenario where the ball comes in on a pitch, the ball disappears. Nobody can find it. The ball is lodged in the umpire's gear. On those scenarios with an umpire interference situation like that, how is that handled properly?
That is an umpire's interference. The ball is now considered out of play. When a pitch ball is out of play, it's a 1 base award to runners on base.
And so it's not an umpire scenario where they just reset and put all the runners back, actually, in that sense. So would you guys go into that more as far as umpire interference goes? Yeah, if you guys could expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, the umpire's interference, actually, the most common one you'll see is the plate umpire interferes with something the catcher's trying to do, such as trying to throw a runner out stealing down to second base. And in the catcher drawing their arm back to throw, they bump into the umpire and they either throw the ball wild or it falls out of their hand or something. That's umpire interference. And we just move the runners back. Whatever the pitch was called, will still stand, but no runners are going to be able to advance on that one. And another time umpires can interfere is on the big diamond, where the base umpire is stationed inside the infielders. The umpire could get hit by a batted ball, in which case that would be umpire interference. On the small diamond, the field umpire should never cause interference because they always start off stationed outside the infielders.
And on the big diamond, on umpire interference, the ball is immediately dead. Batter runner goes to first, and any runners forced to advance are advanced.
So what's the mechanic for that? If you're guilty of it, and has this happened to you guys before?
Yes.
I think I've had it only a few times where the umpire interfered with the catcher trying to make a play. In my experience, really hasn't happened all that much.
And the thing is if let's use the classic example of a runner advancing to second, if the out is made, you disregard the umpire interference. If the catcher doesn't get the out, you call time, you put the runner back to first base. Yes, on the big diamond, I've been hit more than once. Some of our fields, the field isn't all that good, and the ball doesn't necessarily go in a straight line.
Really? Yeah. Since we're discussing, I'm going to switch back over to the obstruction thing. In the scenario I gave you where a catcher is obstructing at home plate, you guys had said let the play develop. I already know what you're going to say, but this happens. What if there's a scenario, a couple of choices? So I have obstruction, but I have a 12-year-old coming from home who thinks he's Pete Rose, and he drops his shoulder and knocks the catcher out. I realize what to do on that, but what is the mechanic? What is the best way to handle that? And
you call the play, and at the end of the play, you eject the offender.
Right.
That's malicious contact, but you're going to call the play. It may be a situation where you're going to score the run, but then you're going to dump the runner. Is that right, Brent? Did I get that right?
Yep. Okay. And if the catcher, if it's not obstruction and a player has the ball, runner goes through him, it's automatic out and automatic ejection.
Here's another one, and this is and what about on the scenario he doesn't drop his shoulder, but he dives face first? And I'm just doing this from experience. I've seen this. That's also dangerous play, and there's a rule against it. But I'm curious to know from a management standpoint, a game management and a mechanic, is it you call the play and then call the player out for the illegal slide, or what's?
Well, if we're talking majors and below, yeah, the runner's out for the head first slide.
There's a certain umpire floating around that doesn't really work anymore, but we were out at a field that had, you guys might know this field, that it's not active anymore, but the entire lot was sand. My runner coming from third tripped in the sand and landed face first on home plate, and he was called out. He tripped. And so,
Well, yeah, that's how do you know that it was intentional or not?
you don't.
So the way I remember being taught is in a situation like that, it's still going to be considered a head first slide. But let me give you change that scenario a little bit. We sometimes play on wet fields. And if it's a natural turf kind of field, you have a situation where a player initiates a slide, and then the cleats dig into the mud and he gets flipped over. Well, in that case, I would not call him for a head first slide because he showed me his intent was to slide properly.
Roger knows this because I called his son out at home one time for that.
Yeah, but the logic behind the ones where, and they say like the trip came in home. Well, one of the things that was also said is, well, if you all of a sudden start allowing that, then you have a whole bunch of kids accidentally tripping coming home. Yeah, we're going to call them out for head first slide.
Kind of jumping around here, moving back on the obstruction, can we get into details and examples of what you would consider type A and type B obstruction?
Okay, well, first of all, the Rule 706 is the appropriate rule here. And there's two paragraphs or two sections in that rule, A and B. That's where we get the terminology type A obstruction, type B obstruction. Type A obstruction is when the defense is making a play on the obstructed runner. Type B obstruction is when the defense is not making a play on the obstructed runner. Under type A obstruction, it's an immediate dead ball, and the umpire is going to award the runner at least one base beyond the last base that they legally touched. Under type B obstruction, it's a delayed dead ball. We're going to let the play continue, see what happens. If the runner does not advance to the base that the umpire thought they would have reached had there not been obstruction, then the umpire can award that. If the runner advances to or beyond that base, then we're just going to ignore the obstruction.
And then you have the other one, which is we have obstruction at first base. The ball's 25 feet behind second base in the center fielder's hands. No way on God's green earth would they have made it to second base safely had the obstruction not occurred. It's in the judgment of the umpire they would have reached, the base they would have reached had the obstruction not occurred. And that's the second part of the obstruction rule that a lot of managers and coaches don't read is, oh, they automatically get the base. No. Would they have gotten the base had the obstruction not occurred? No. So, yeah, you don't give it to them.
To make this for the coaches to understand, let's say a kid hits what would normally be a stand-up double. As he's rounding first base, we have and I really like, Nick, what you said about oblivious to what's happening as intentional. But let's say that this runner is rounding first and collides with the first baseman who's not paying attention and gets tagged at second. Are we going to rule the obstruction on that and just allow him to keep second base, or are we going to actually give him third base?
Well, in this situation, when the obstruction occurred, they were not yet making a play on that runner, so it's type B. So we let the play proceed. At the end of the play, where would the runner have been had there not been obstruction? If the batter runner was thrown out at second base on a close play, if he wouldn't have run into the first baseman, he probably would have made it standing up, like you said, a stand-up double. But if he's 15, 20 feet away from the base when the throw comes in and they get him out, he wasn't going to make it there anyway.
So when the manager comes out and asks you what, because this happens, you're not going to, what about the obstruction at first? I mean, my runner ran into the first baseman. What's your reply on that?
I, as the umpire, James, you're doing the plate, I'm doing the bases. I see the obstruction at first. I signal the obstruction. How do I signal the obstruction? I point at it and go, that's obstruction. I just point it, bring it back. Now I'm taking the runner into second because it's my call at second base because I'm the base umpire. Now, my mechanics, even though it's type B, because I don't want a lot of stuff happening after the play, I go to type A type deals because in my judgment, I felt this is a banger at second, but that they would have been safe had the obstruction not occurred. I go time, I point to first, I said, had obstruction at first, you second base. I don't go runners out, time, we had obstruction at first, you second base. I don't want all the hassles that go along with that. So I just go time.
Yeah, I agree with Brent's description there, because very technically, we should call the play that occurred,
Right.
and then call time, and then take whatever corrective actions.
Right.
we
Because
want.
because if you had four people on the field, okay, and you two hadn't gone out on the ball to the outfield, basically they're taking the play at second. I'm the first base umpire. I saw and signaled obstruction at first base, but maybe the second base umpire didn't really hear me. So they call the runner out. I'm at first going time. We had obstruction at first, runner second base.
So even if if the runner's standing on second base, it's still time.
If a play is being made on him, yes.
It's kind of cut and dry here. Roger,
No, you didn't lose me.
Okay.
I'm just listening.
Okay. Let's talk about the fake tag and the decoy, or the deke. I've heard that, because that's an interesting thing. You see a lot of it in high school. Don't see a lot of it. Yes, some of the higher end elite 12-year-old teams might try it. But what are we looking for here, and what's the difference?
Well, a fielder just standing there pounding their glove as if they're imminently going to catch a throw, that's your deke. He's trying to decoy the runner. A fake tag is actual trying to apply a tag without the ball. There's one more thing we want to look at. If the runner slides as a result of that fake tag, now we definitely have got obstruction, and we're going to have some words with the team about unsafe play, because sliding is a dangerous, hazardous, whatever. You can get injured when you're sliding. So that's why the fake tag is not allowed.
And also, if you have warned a player for a fake tag and they do it again, they have removed themselves from the game.
Well, the reason for that is you have reminded them what the rule is, and they do it again. Now they have willfully violated a rule.
And I played ball, and I don't understand it. This started, I don't know, 8-10 years ago. You got a runner at second, and for some reason, I don't know who's telling the kids to do this, but you see shortstops popping their glove behind the runner to confuse the runner. You know what? When I play shortstop, I absolutely do not want that runner to know where I am standing.
Yeah.
Why would I give that away? And I mean, that's an advantage. And so I don't understand the thinking behind it.
Sometimes we umpires kind of chuckle under our breath.
Really? You really want that guy to know where you're standing? So we'll move on to the interference then. And Roger, if you'd read the one in here on the interference part A there, just explain it a little bit out of the book.
Sure. So offensive interference is an act by a member of the team at bat which interferes with, obstructs, impedes, hinders, or confuses any fielder attempting to make a play. If the umpire declares the batter runner, or a runner out for interference, all other runners shall return to the last base that was, in the judgment of the umpire, legally touched at the time of the interference, unless otherwise provided by these rules.
The approved ruling is interference does not have to be intentional to be. What are some examples of that, guys? I mean, we could go on forever, but have you got a couple of hot ones that?
Well, one thing, let me make a kind of an editorial comment. In defining interference, the rule uses the word obstruct, and we wonder why people confuse interference and obstruction. You'd think they could clean that language up a little bit.
They could leave out obstruct and just say impede, hinders, or confuses, and to be just fine. Now, what is a classic interference is runner interference. Anytime the runner is struck by a batted ball, they're out, except, Nick, do you want to go with the exceptions?
A fair batted ball.
Yeah, a fair batted ball. Yes, a fair batted ball. That's why it always gets me back to umpires chuckling. The kid standing on third who's touching the bag and starting off basically on the line or inside the line so that they're in fair territory. So somebody hits a screamer down the line, they get struck, they're out. If they've got contact with their left foot on the outside corner towards home plate and then start off the bag in foul territory and they get struck, that's a foul ball. That's, again, a chuckle moment for an umpire. It's like, why are you doing that?
So then it goes on. B is the defensive interference, which is noted. The umpire's interference, which we discussed. Interesting, only a plate umpire may interfere with a catcher, and only after a cleanly caught ball or a pitch ball.
The deal is that on the batted ball, I was sort of waiting for Nick. When it is not runner's interference is when it passes the framework and then strikes the runner directly behind. Let's say the first baseman is playing in front of the line and it goes through them as the runner's coming off from first base.
Yeah,
But,
I was just waiting until we got through the definition.
Oh, okay.
Before I wanted to talk about the exception.
They mentioned spectator interference. Have you guys seen that? Have you seen a lot of that at all in your careers with spectator? I mean, I guess it really depends on the park you're in. Do you see that?
In Little League, no, but in the Cubs game where everybody all got upset at that spectator who reached over the field to play, and the left field umpire did not call spectators interference because it was in Wrigley Field.
So on any interference, the ball is dead. And how do we do the mechanic on that as umpires? What is it? That's interference. You're out.
Well, the first words out of your mouth are time. That's interference. Runners out. And then if you have to move other runners back, then you would, point at them and say, you back to second, you back to first, or whatever. Like it says, on any interference, the ball is dead, except catcher's interference, umpire's interference, and what's the last one?
Batter's interference.
Yeah, catchers, batters, and plate umpires interference. Those three are not an immediate dead ball. Those are delayed dead balls. Another one of these things that make you chuckle, if you go to Little League umpire schools and such, they tell you that Little League doesn't recognize delayed dead ball. That's that softball organization that uses that terminology. How many times in the Little League rule book do they talk about things being delayed dead balls?
So a scenario, let's talk about this, because a lot of umpires may not be aware of this. When there's several things happening at once, don't we as umpires have to take them in the order they happened? Here's an example. You get a batter that hits a screamer down the right field line. It's easily a stand-up triple. And as he's rounding first, and this actually happened to me, guys, the first baseman reaches out and hugs him, holds him, and then the kid breaks free, comes in. He would have been safe at third, but I get a head first slide into third base. Now, the questions are, because not only are you going to have to rule that on the field, but you're going to get questions from the scorekeeper as well. How do we do that? So the order of it is key, and I'm curious to your guys' thoughts.
The way I would rule is you have the runner out going into third with head first slide, because Little League's number one priority is the safety of the player. That's why with the American Pediatrics, who encouraged Little League to basically outlaw the head first slide. It's an unsafe act. I have had hand injuries and spinal injuries.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, head first slide at majors and below. I'm sorry, son. Even though they bear hugged you at first base, you're out. You shouldn't have done that.
I agree with that. We got the obstruction at first base, and hopefully the umpire, pointed at it and called out the obstruction. And even
I was flying solo on that one.
Oh, you got all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I got obstruction here. Yeah.
The obstruction part, because it's type B, is a delayed dead ball, and it's something that involves umpire judgment. The head first slide is a rule book violation. That's black and white in the rule book. So there's no judgment to exercise on a head first slide. You got to call them out.
Now, the next question is, because you're going to get lots of questions from lots of people. The manager, that's a reasonable, both sides, you can explain that well. When the scorebook comes to you and said, well, does that mean he gets a double? How do I score that?
Oh, from a scoring standpoint?
Yeah.
It'd be a double.
Yeah, that's the way I would score it, but depends on the situation. If you're at your home league and it's people then I'll try to answer their question properly. But I get a question like that in an all-star game or something, I just tell the scorekeeper, hey, you're the scorekeeper, I'm just the umpire, you figure it out.
Yeah.
And then we have some rules here. 605, batter is out when. Roger, did you add that, or did these guys add that? What was the significance of 605 in there?
Let me see here. I added 605 because it said the words interference, or I believe. Yes. If you look, the reason why I added the G, H, J, and I is that they actually did talk about different versions of interference. So like in 605G, the AR says if the bat is thrown into fair or foul territory and interferes with a defensive player attempting to make a play, interference shall be called, whether intentional or not. This is referring to where the bat ends up lying in after a play. So all of these were different versions of interference that were related to the batter, whereas in Rule 706, those are all runner, because Rule 7 deals with the runner in the Little League rulebook, whereas Rule 6 deals with the batter. So these were batter interference type issues.
That's, I don't know how many times I've pored over this book looking for the thrown bat. I don't know where this comes from. You guys have been around longer than I have. Was a thrown bat ever an out in baseball, ever?
No.
No place in the rule book.
And
Nope.
It never has been there. So is that like home? Where'd that come from? Because I still get people say, oh, you threw the bat, he's out. And I'm thinking, it's interesting history on that. Some of these alternate rules. You're like, what?
Well, I don't know where it comes from, but when I was coaching, when my daughter was little, she was at bat. She hit the ball and wildly released her bat, and a runner on third crossed the plate. I argued for the umpire to call my daughter out so that we would get the run to score.
That's creative. I like it.
Now, the ones that we've had come up is had umpires wanting to remove the player for throwing the bat. And unless they're throwing the bat intentionally back at the catcher, like to prevent him from making a play, something along those lines, you can basically warn them. If it's your local league, you can somewhat deal with it how you want to. Normally, I've gone in the past and gone to the manager of the team going, yeah, can you remove him and tell if the bat's being released and it's hitting the catcher or me as the umpire back there, can we teach them how to do that correctly? But I actually had an umpire I was working with wanting to remove a player from an international tournament game, i.e. All-Stars, because they threw the bat. That's like, no, you can't do that. And I know because a long time ago, when I first started umpiring, went all the way back to Williamsport. Williamsport said, no, you can't do that.
So how I've handled that personally, and we all have our different ways, but what I've done is called attention to it by going to the manager and just letting him know that's a safety issue and giving them a warning. And the nice things about warnings is you get to decide, it's not a threat, but you get to decide with warnings how many to give. Most of the managers that I've worked with are very, very cool about it, and they'll go and they'll talk to kids. Hey, we just got a team warning. You need to pay attention. And usually that takes care of it.
So I had a situation at juniors game where the kid threw the bat. I went to the manager, said, hey, we can't have him throwing the bat. He's throwing the bat and hit me and the catcher once, comes up again, hits us again. And I said, hey, what are we doing about this? He's like, I'm not going to do anything about it. I go, okay, either you're going to do something about it or we're going to have the next coach on your bench do something about it. And we had a discussion. He decided to leave. Invariably, it cleaned up after that, and I did not get hit by another bat by that particular player.
and I've told Nick this also, over the years, when I was UIC, we had removed players for doing that, where it's coming back and hitting us. And what I found, because the number one thing a youth player wants to do is not win. The number one thing they want to do is play the game. And because they're now not allowed to play the game, they feel that loss. One kid in particular, I remember, because he was just doing it all the time. And I sat him down. I never saw that kid his entire Little League career after that throw a bat once.
Yep. Let's. I mean, we got the obstruction and we got the interference, and it's kind of making sense. It's sinking in. In our previous podcast, we talked about the rundown or the pickle or whatever you call it. If you guys could help a little bit on the mechanics with that, we talked about how to position yourself with a partner to cover that. And I'm speaking mainly of one rundown between first and second. It's enough for any human being to be standing there trying to watch whether a tag was made and that kind of stuff, let alone thinking about potential for obstruction and interference. What are some rules of thumb as far as mechanics go from an umpire standpoint? What's the best way to position yourself? You've got a lot to watch in a very short amount of time. I'm curious to know how you guys, what goes through your mind and what you're thinking and how you're reacting. Hopefully you have a partner that you're somewhat working with, but I'm curious to know how you guys, especially with the obstruction interference situation, how are you going to see those things with regard to trying to see whether there was a tag or not?
Well, I guess I'll start off on this, assuming we have more than one umpire. Ideally, you want to position one umpire at each end of the rundown. You want one umpire on the outfield side, the other umpire on the infield side. So now you've got pretty good visual coverage of everything. What you don't want to do is be sprinting back and forth with the runner. Just take a couple of steps, keep yourself under control. Don't let your adrenaline take off on you. And an important aspect, other than the fielders getting in the runner's way and possibly interference, we also have to watch what the runner is doing. When the runner is reversing direction, they should be coming to the point of where they're more in the base line. That's the direct line between both bases. If they reverse direction and they move a step or two toward the outfield, the next time they move another couple steps toward the outfield. Well, now they're out of the base path to avoid a tag.
Part of this, you're going to have obstruction more on a rundown. The only time you would have interference is if a runner intentionally, reached out with their hand or their arm to make contact with the ball so that the player couldn't receive it. The obstruction part of it, what happens a lot of times is someone who has not been taught correctly. So they've released the ball. Let's say they were running the runner towards second base. They've released the ball. Now they're somewhat continuously going towards second base, and that runner turns around, and now they take a step. Well, they either make contact or they take a step to go around that player who now does not have the ball. That would be obstruction.
Okay. Would it be interference on a batter in this rundown where let's say it's a flip to the first base? First baseman goes to gun it. The runner takes off running back to second. First base guns to second, hits the batter or the batter runner or the runner square in the back. There's the intentional part of actually trying to deflect the ball, but there's one where they just get pegged.
But there's a point that I want to make about the first scenario we were talking about. Mm-hmm. When that runner who's in the rundown gets obstructed, which type of obstruction is that? It's type A, because they were making a play on the runner when he was obstructed.
Right.
So that's an immediate dead ball, and they're going to be awarded at least one base beyond the last base they legally touched.
In this case, it's not in your judgment they would have taken down the obstruction not occurred, because they were heading back towards first base. But I'm sorry, they were already on first base. In this case, we're going to penalize the defense because of their actions. So the runner is advanced to second.
Sorry, James, that
That's
I
good.
had to break in there,
No,
but
please do.
would you go over your new scenario again?
Well, these develop so quickly, but I've had scenarios where the runner is now, because the ball's at first, he's now breaking for second. The first baseman makes a throw to second, and it pegs the runner in the back. Is that nothing? What is that?
That's nothing.
Okay.
On a thrown ball, it has to be intentional.
You have to see.
Mechanics wise, you see that happen. What do you do as an umpire? You throw the safe sign and declare that's nothing. You let people know, yeah, there was something there. I saw it, and I'm telling you that's not a rules violation. That's nothing.
Okay.
So that hopefully helps keep the managers in their dugouts.
Well, good luck with that.
Unlike the throw to first base and the runner's lane interference.
Yeah, right.
That's a different scenario.
You guys posted just a fantastic picture from the 2010 girls softball Western Regional tournament, and you guys were there. And if you could explain a little bit about what happened and how this transpired. I was told this is like basically the poster for obstruction that Little League uses. It's a once in a lifetime kind of situation, but I'd be curious if you guys could explain how this developed. And these pictures that they gave me will be on the website. You'll be able to see, everybody will be able to see this. But if you guys could just explain a little bit about what happened.
Hey, this was 2010. Cell phone cameras and all that kind of stuff, weren't as prevalent as they were today. But fortunately, the smaller picture in the upper left of the page there, one of the umpires on the crew for that game, his wife was in the stands with a video camera. She cut a still frame out of the video, and that's the one that we're showing here, where we got a circle around the ball here, and then the other labels shows the fielders and the contact here.
To describe it for the audio people, what had happened was the home team was up 3-2. The ball was hit to the outfield. The runner rounded third. The catcher sat up in the line, straddling the line, up the line. Basically, what happened was, as I said, the ball, or the one picture that's on this page on the left-hand side, shows where the ball was when the contact was initially made. The picture on the right shows after the catcher had actually received the ball, and the fact that the catcher's glove is with the ball in it is behind the runner. You can pretty much figure that the runner made contact with the catcher before the ball got into the mitt. The way things used to be taught was always pay attention to where the ball is. If the ball's in the glove in front of the runner, we had nothing. If the ball's in the glove behind the runner, we probably had obstruction. So in this case, we did. And I happened to be sitting outside because we were hosting this tournament. I was sitting outside and I was looking at this play from basically up the first baseline. In other words, first baseline extended from where I was sitting. And I actually saw the player slow down before even the initial contact was made. Sure. So pretty much I had obstruction at that point before the plate umpire even called it. So yeah, this was an excitement one. And because the winner would go to Alpenrose to the Girls Softball World Series, and Pendleton thought that they just won the game. Needless to say, the Pendleton manager somewhat removed himself from the game after this call, and the tournament director assigned me to babysit the manager from Pendleton for the rest of the game. And
this would have been what, the top of the sixth or something? Or
this is the top of the sixth. Pendleton was the home team.
Right. Had
this been the third out, the game would have been over. Pendleton would have gone to Alpenrose.
Okay. But the score was Gilroy 11, Pendleton 3. So how did those other?
Well, again, it what ended up being a 3-3 because they did actually, luckily enough, retire and did not allow Gilroy to score another run. However, they didn't score any runs, so it ended up being 3-3 at the bottom of 6, went into extra innings, and then the wheels just fell off for Pendleton.
I heard that it took about a half an hour to get the game back in gear. I heard, and then I also heard that everybody was screaming and shouting on the field. The kids came out, and how do you guys handle messes like that as umpires? What do you?
Well, this was a very confusing situation, which was partially fueled by the plate umpire did not have very crisp mechanics to make the call. The guy that was working the plate worked a lot of ASA softball games, used ASA mechanics in calling this obstruction. In following the Little League mechanic, this was type A, they're making a play in the runner, it would have been time, that's obstruction, but that's not the way this other organization teaches to call that play.
Okay.
So then, of course, Hamilton thought they were going to win the game, and so there was all of that brouhaha with it. And after the game, what the interesting part, I don't know, it was a day or two after the game, we got word that one of the Pendleton parents was an attorney and threatened Little League with a suit.
Oh, come on.
So then, and I had received this still from the video about that same time that we were able to send that back to Williamsport and say, hey, here's the play.
Here's
You
the
think it was a
ball,
bad
here's the
call?
contact. Yeah.
That was the end of it. We didn't hear anything more after that. Well, you got to keep your cool, obviously, which is very tough to do. I've been in a couple of situations, not exactly this kind of situation, but heated situations of this magnitude. Did not do as good a job keeping my cool as I should have. You mentioned, I think it was James, about just standing back and kind of waiting until everything settles down on its own. Well, that's one thing you can do. Hopefully, well, because it was a regional tournament, we had tournament staff there.
Oh, sure.
Right.
So the umpires had resources outside the fence that could help them get this back under control.
And that's what happened at this particular tournament.
Okay.
There is one other thing maybe we should cover, James.
Yeah.
We go back to the definition of interference.
Okay.
And I think it was paragraph A. If the umpire declares the batter runner, or runner out for interference, A is talking about, I guess it really isn't rooted there, but it goes to rule, what is it, 709? Yeah, we made some comments earlier about a runner touched by a fair batted ball is out. And there's a couple of exceptions. And 709K says that if a fair ball goes through or by an infielder and touches a runner immediately back of that infielder, or touches a runner after having been deflected, that's not going to be interference. So what does through mean? In the rule, through means literally goes between the fielder's legs. What does by mean? That the ball goes to either side of the fielder and they weren't able to catch it. And then deflected, well, that's pretty obvious. The reasoning here is that the runner has the expectation that the fielder is going to catch the ball. If the fielder doesn't catch the ball, we're not going to punish the runner for that. But in making this determination, whether it's interference or not, the umpire also has to look and make sure there was no other fielder in position to make a play on that batted ball. Example is a ball hit into the hole on the third base side. Third baseman charges up, misses the ball. The runner goes behind him and it hits him, but the shortstop was sitting back there waiting for the ball to get to him. In that situation, that's going to be interference. But if the shortstop wasn't there in position to make a play on that ball, now that's not going to be interference.
That's one of those situations where, no matter what the runner does, they're pretty much hosed. So
what about a scenario? You got a runner at second, you got a light blooper to the shortstop, and the pitcher goes out for it, misses it, and then it hits and the shortstop is set up to get it, but then the ball hits the runner. Is the runner out on that situation?
Well, remember I said early on in this that only one fielder gets protection.
Right.
So if the pitcher went back for the ball and the pitcher actually touched it, the pitcher's the player who's going to get the protection. And since they erred on it, we're not going to penalize the runner for the pitcher's error.
Okay.
Even though there was another player there ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a deflected ball. It's not a batted ball. It's not the initial play on a batted ball.
Okay.
So like I said, we're not going to punish the runner for the pitcher's error.
In the scenario where we had, about 10 years ago, we had a league pretty high up. I think they were at regionals, and the third base coach assisted the runner. And you guys know what I'm talking about. And what I'm curious about on that is, does the assistance situation, is that considered interference from the offense on that, or is that just an assist? Because I know you can't do it, but what I'm curious is there actually a definition of it?
There's a separate rule that covers that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered interference. The interesting part of that, this was at a regional tournament, so we had, I don't know, they probably had 6 umpires on that crew.
Mm-hmm.
The third base umpire was sizing up what's going on there, and he's telling the coach, don't do it. And the coach did it anyway.
They physically assisted a runner, which a base coach cannot do. They cannot physically assist.
Can anyone physically assist a runner? Because I have a scenario. I have somebody told me about a kid broke their ankle and had hit a home run and broke their. It was a softball game. The girl had hit a home run and was rounding second, twisted and broke her ankle and fell, and the infield defenders picked her up and brought her to third and then brought her home.
That was an NCAA, and the players actually went to the umpires and went, what can we do?
Right.
The offense couldn't do anything, but in this case, the defense could.
What I want to do then is just kind of go around the room real quick and give some parting comments. If you guys have anything that you think maybe we missed or we need to touch on, that's the time to bring it up. But we'll start with Brent. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Most people might remember is in 2013 in the World Series, there was an obstruction call on the Boston third baseman. Jim Joyce was the umpire at third base. He signaled obstruction. The Cardinal runner attempting to advance to home plate basically stumbled over the third baseman who had missed the throw down to third, and basically stumbled over him and went to home. There was somewhat of a banger at home plate, which the catcher thought they had the out, and the umpire signaled safe. That's about the only thing the umpire did wrong at the plate. But immediately after the signaling safe, he pointed to third base, saying that was obstruction. Again, for Major League Baseball, professional umpires, they don't get this call. They just don't get this call. So, the correct call would have been time, pointed to third, should have said time, pointed to third, that's obstruction, pointed, you score. That's the correct way of doing it. So a lot of people remember that play.
In reviewing this stuff and putting some notes together in preparation for this, one thing that kind of stuck out at me is that, obstruction is a fairly simple rule, actually. But there's only a few rules that mention it. You go to interference, man, I've got like 5 pages of notes and,
I know.
and a whole list of rules to talk about interference. And, we didn't talk about base coaches the and in other batters interference situations. Especially batters interference, like, okay, you got a runner on third and the pitch gets past the catcher and the batter just stands there in the batter's box. And they're trying to make a play on that runner coming in. We didn't even talk about that scenario. Yeah. But there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot to interference. So you could probably either for a future podcast continue on the interference, or maybe even just do one solely focused on interference.
on
Absolutely.
batter's interference.
Yeah, exactly.
But the other one also that when I was starting umpire, and the part of the rule books and the way they're written, I don't know if it's still in there, but there's a part on interference that talks about no runners may advance, no runners may score except those forced to advance. And I was like, how in the world do you score a run on interference? There's only one. It's on the big diamond, the umpire's inside, bases are loaded, and they get struck by a batted ball.
Oh, well, yeah.
Ball's dead. You advance all the runners one base, and hopefully that wasn't a tie game, bottom of the seventh.
I was just going to say,
with
man,
2 outs.
you're gonna need some help getting to the parking lot on that one. Okay, Roger, anything to add?
No, I don't have a lot to add. The only thing I would say is that for like a novice umpire, one of the things I've taken away from this is really the way I look at things is generally trying to make what should have happened right with when there's interference, obstruction, what have you. Just trying to correct for the error or the misplay by whichever offending team occurred. I think that's the simplest way I try to do it on the field to make it, because these rules could be really confusing or daunting for somebody who's just starting out. So the easy way is how do I make it right? How do I fix it? And then what rules support me in fixing it? So that's what I took away from this.
And, I think Nick nailed it. The reality is this is actually a day class that we could spend on just obstruction and interference alone, and with a break for lunch. I mean, to try to cover all of this in a light and fun way in an hour is really just kind of barely scratching the surface. So yes, it would be useful in future podcasts to sort of circle back around and maybe tie some of these concepts to future podcasts. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time tonight. I really, really appreciate the time and the passion that you all have for the game and for these kids, and in helping me use this medium of the podcast to get it out there and to the people that are just starting. Maybe you got a game tomorrow or whatever. The only way you're going to learn is by doing. Hopefully you meet some people like I have that can mentor you and answer questions and be available. There is so many, I don't know how many times I hear somebody say, that's a once in a lifetime thing. In my 20 plus year career, I could tell you I've had plenty of those. Lots of one-time things, That's why we keep coming back. And so thank you guys again for your time and your effort and your passion for this. And we'll do more for sure.
Thank you, James.
And then, of course, Roger, throughout this whole thing, even when I came to you with this idea 6 months ago, you've supported me and helped me make this thing as good as it can be. So thank you very much, Roger.
Oh, you're welcome. This is a fun experience.
Yeah, so we've got more podcasts coming. Please stay tuned. They'll be out soon. Our hope is to get at least 6 or 10 out by the end of this year's spring baseball season. So that's the goal. Hopefully we get there. So here's your disclaimer. The rules and opinions discussed here are personal interpretations from seasoned umpires and coaches. The podcast is not directly endorsed, nor are we compensated by any youth sports body, including Little League Baseball. Actual applications of these rules and coaching ideas may vary depending on your location or your league's official rules. So please discuss those with your local umpire chiefs and league presidents. And that's always a good idea. You might want to talk to the people that know about the rules before you start just doing them yourself. That's why we're doing this. So anyway, thank you so much again, Roger. Thanks for your help. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Awesome.